I guess I will start the talk because it's lunchtime, and I do appreciate that you came and you found the room, which was another security challenge, as always. My name is Victoria. I'm coming from Norway. I work as a security architect in Microsoft. So daily, I'm spending my time helping my customers to land securely in Azure. And by night, I'm doing Devsecops, as well by days too. I do have quite strict plan for today, and our plan is to talk about the Devsecops. I just want everyone to be on the same page as me when we speak about the Devsecops. There are different meanings of the Devsecops. Then we will look on the metrics, why, what, and how. And I will give some final notes on with the call for the action. And let me repeat, this talk is about Devsecops. Yeah, nice. Okay, so finally, I'm giving the talks about the Devsecops for the few years, and I was a bit challenged to find the definition. And finally, there is a definition from Gartner. It's a pretty wide, but let me put this quite simple. The Devsecops is all about integrating security into the process, tools, and of course for the people as well. So if you are working with the DevOps, if you're doing the DevOps, then it's just of integrating the security inside of the DevOps. And let me pause here and ask, how many of you are familiar with Devsecops? Good. And how many of you are doing Devsecops? And if you can keep your hands, and let me ask you, how many of you are doing successfully Devsecops? Yes, and one of the reasons is that we sometimes don't know the metrics, right? We don't know what is a DevSecops at the end of the day. And by the way, why do you want to have a DevSecops? Because it's fancy, because it's buzzword, and everyone does, and I should do, right? Actually, there are different reasons, because obviously we want to have the improved security posture and reduced risks, as always. That always comes with the security. And we want to do it faster and in more agile way. And as well, we want to reduce the cost, because obviously when we speak about the security and the development, the things what you hear from the stakeholders is like, hey, how can we reduce the costs? By the way, for people who are confused, this is a Devsecops talk. It's not WebRTC, sorry. So we want to decrease the costs as well. And as well, it gives us the improved customer experience and satisfaction. It's not only about the delivering faster the new functionality in applications, but as well delivering them in the secure way and improving the security. And if you look on the Devsecops itself, I'm talking about that in my separate talks too. What is a Devsecops? It's all about, like I mentioned, integrating the security, process tools, and people education in 5 steps. So technically speaking, you just add the security in every single step of your development lifecycle, on the application lifecycle management. You start with the phase where you do the development. This is where you integrate the process, what's called threat modeling, and add on the top some security plugins. Then you define as well the security coding standard. And once you're ready, you start to commit the code. And this is the most popular place where we see the security tools, like the dependency management, right? The static code analysis. And then on the acceptance or on the delivery, you improve this Devsecops by adding additional security scanning. You work with the infrastructure as a code, because once you have infrastructure as a code, you can scan it as any other type of the code. And then it goes like in the production, you add the configuration checks, pen testing. Yeah, it doesn't go anywhere. The pen tests are still needed, but they are quite good as a complementary. And as I like to say, it makes sense to do the pen test if you have placed some effort in the security before that. And then on the operations, it's pretty similar as we look on the DevOps process itself. It's all about the continuous monitoring and the continuous improvement. And what is most important, if someone tells you that you are secure for the 100%, just fire that person, because that's not possible. And that's the reason why on the operations, you need as well to be ready for the blameless postmortems. You need to be ready to have the disaster plans. What if I'm getting hacked? What if the data is leaked? How we would behave, what we would do, what is our procedure? And the most important, what DevOps teaches us is as well do the blameless postmortems. Just don't try to find the guilty one, but just find the root cause and say like, okay, that happened, what should we do so not to get that again? So that's shortly about the Devsecops, and like I mentioned, I'm giving the separate talks, going deep dive into that. But why do we need to measure the Devsecops? And there are the several reasons. And the one of them is like what I was trying to challenge you by asking, how do you know that the security tools are working? Just because we're running and producing plenty of the reports? Is the security bottleneck in the delivery speed? And then we're just switching it off because, I mean, we need to deliver the new functionality. And how do you know that you progress? And how do you know that you prioritize the proper security measures? What I have seen is like people were so obsessed with the dependencies while their code itself had like, you know, SQL injections and all of those things. Obviously, the priority somewhere went wrong. And at the end of the day, is the Devsecops effective at all? Maybe the previous routines were more effective when comparing what you have right now. And actually, measurements helps make the security as a priority. Because you cannot just show up at your stakeholders and say like, hey, let's see, I need next sprint to spend fully on the security because it's important, we're gonna improve, we are doing Devsecops. And the stakeholders and the C-level, they say like, can you prove it? What are the numbers? How do you progress? Or you bought like the fancy dependency management tool, and now you're ready to buy the SaaS tool, and you're coming to the stakeholders and say like, we need to have money because we see that we improve in the security, and they are like, but you're asking for the more money, and you're saying that you're improving. What are the numbers? So I hope by the time I have convinced you that we need to do the measurements, then the question is like, how should we do that? One of the popular ways is to build a maturity model. How many of you are familiar with the maturity model principles? Good. And there's the one famous guy, Martin Fowler, who has defined very well what is a maturity model. In essence, it helps you. It helps you to assess the current effectiveness, maybe of the people or the process, and then it helps you to figure out what are the capabilities needed to support the next steps to improve your state. It's a very popular thing. You could see them in different areas, like in the development, in the security. In security, it's sometimes it's overused, and usually it defines kind of the levels. Here's one example. It's a pretty classical example. It's like you are at the beginner stage, when you're into the intermediate, advanced, and then you become as an expert. So that helps you to define like, where are we on the DevSecops journey? Oh, we are beginner because we heard what is a DevSecops and we want to implement. And maybe we have some processes in place, but they are not organized, or we do have ad hoc tools and so on. And once you start to mature, you go to the next step and next step. There is another example, and this one is, by the way, clearly defined by US General Services Administration, which strictly defines which level you do have when it comes to DevSecops, like the level 1, level 2, level 3. And I gave you just 2 examples. But once you start to look into the maturity model, you will realize that there are plenty of them. You can choose from the OWASP Devsecops maturity model, you can choose from Datadog, you can choose from Gartner, and more. And that's a problem. We want to define everything as a frameworks. We want to have these, like, blue pill, it's like which says you the exact way of the moving. That's one problem. Another problem with the maturity model, and let me put myself clear, I'm not against the maturity models. They are quite good as a complementary, they are quite good into the defining where you need to go, but they are not your excuse to say this is the end state. We are, like, experts. So the problem with the maturity model is that, especially in the security area, once you start to implement the security solutions, you will see that there is no linear progress. It's going to be like up, then down, then up. That's one thing. Another is that the maturity model tends to focus on the whole organization, and there could be like different maturity levels for different teams. And finally, it doesn't answer on all of those questions. Actually, maturity model requires you already to have those answers. So, like I mentioned, maturity model is quite good thing as a supportive, but that doesn't help you, like, to get the full picture and collect the data. And this is something what we can learn again from the development, because Devsecops, or the security, with such huge focus on the security in development, I don't want to say pretty new area, but comparing with the development years and with the infrastructure, it's kind of new. And this is where we can learn a bit from the development as well. Like, we already do the metrics in development, right? Just for all of those reasons, like to find out, is organization achieving its business goal? Like, stakeholders wants to have the answer, what they're paying for. Are those features or the functionality is useful in their business? Is there that service stable? And then so on. And the way how the development gets measured, it has the 4 common metrics, which are focusing on the 2 areas, on the tempo and on stability. So this is what we can learn from the development, and we will see it once we start to build the KPIs for the Devsecops as well, but we will get back to this deployment frequency, change lead time, and then so on. So the next question is like, okay, what exactly we need to measure in Devsecops? And here is, first of all, that's the reason why I ask how many of you are doing Devsecops. You need to define what Devsecops is for you, for your organization. Is it just about the automation of the security? And which is fine. You don't need, like, to focus on all 3 areas of the process, tools, and people. Maybe you have defined for the organization that you are sticking with the automating the security tests. I mean, that's okay. So, and once you have defined what is Devsecops for you, you can identify your Devsecops challenges. And based on those challenges, you can start to build your KPIs. And I will talk about the KPIs a bit more. So speaking about the metrics, like I mentioned, the Devsecops is heavily relying on the DevOps. And the main goals are pretty the same for the DevOps and for the security. The velocity, agility, and the performance. And again, we don't need to invent the bicycle. We can look what we have in the DevOps when it comes to the measurement. In this particular case, I would suggest, it's quite an old book, to be honest, but it's a really good book when it comes to the DevOps. It's called Accelerate. And what it does, it introduces one of the most popular metrics, which are called DORA, or DevOps Research and Assessment Metrics. And those are like metrics which gives you the suggestions. The one is like, measure at the global level, not on the team level. And it's really applicable for the security as well. Let's imagine you have several teams, like the front-end team, the back-end team, or back-end team who are developing like the front-end solution and the back-end team. And once you start to measure the security in the back-end team, you may get the good numbers, right? But what happens at the front-end team? If they screwed up with the security, then the global level of the security is bad. So that means when you build the metrics, you need to focus on the global level, on your company. Another suggestion is measure outcomes versus outputs. So it doesn't matter how many hours you spend on the security, if at the end of the day there is no efficient tools are in the place, people are not educated, those hours don't count. And focus on the capabilities, not maturity. That's what we looked on the maturity model. So rather to focus on what is like the beginner, intermediate, expert level, let's look what the capabilities you have in the organization, in your team, and so on. Don't miss the forest for the trees. That's what we discussed already, like focusing on the wrong priorities, getting obsessed with the one security tool when actually you do have other problems. So speaking about that, once we keep in mind all of those suggestions, we can start to look on the KPIs. And just shortly reminder, I know it doesn't look fancy, especially for the technical people. Once I start to speak about the KPIs, it gets boring because business loves them, developers don't. I mean, seriously, I would rather write 10 lines of the code than I would speak about the KPIs. But if you need to sell your security to the stakeholders, you need to speak on the stakeholders' language. And they speak for the KPIs. So once we have understood that, we looked on the KPIs. The most important thing, what I always tend to say, each KPI should have a meaning. Just don't follow what is called as a Goodhart's law. When you are like, running measurements just for the measurement's sakes, or you're defining so wide KPIs, like saying, like on this example, we are saying like, okay, let's measure it like, on the number of nails made, right? So the KPIs should follow and give the good meaning. And again, if we want to learn something about the KPIs, we look on the business, how the business builds those KPIs. And there is the thing what is called SMART, which helps to construct the good KPIs. And it translates as a simple, measurable, actionable, relevant, time-based. So once you start to define KPIs, you remember that they should be not complicated to measure, because someone behind the scenes needs to track them, right? They should be measurable. So once you have defined that you go either quantitatively or the quality, you need to stick with that definition, and you cannot change on the way. Actionable, because if you are just measuring for the measurement's sake, there is no outcome. It doesn't help for the decision. Relevant, obviously relevant to the security, right? And the KPIs should be used to show changes over the time. And I will give the example. So summarizing, they should be the SMART. And it's a wonderful thing. I would use the SMART as an suggestion, like how to build the KPIs, but I would not stick as another framework like SMART says that, and this is why I have that KPI, even it's not applicable for my organization. Another question is like, how many KPIs do I need? Try to answer the questions for yourself, like, will that KPI provide the value to a wide variety of the group of users, or just for you? Then another thing, will that KPI inspire the meaningful change, which is quite important? And we will see some examples of that. Is it possible to track the KPI in a meaningful way? Because obviously, if you would spend another half of the budget just for the tracking KPIs, then Devsecops is not successful, obviously. And how much extra work will be created by tracking KPIs? So just don't get into the what is called as a Cobra effect. And actually, this is a quite old story that it goes something like that. Back in the colony in India, the top breeds has decided that there are too many snakes around, the cobras specifically. So what they did, they said that for every dead cobra, they're going to pay the money. And it turns out that they started to receive a lot of the cobras. And it turns out that the guys were just creating the cobra farm to get the money. And they closed that initiative and they opened all the farms. And at the end of the day, we got more cobras than we used to have before. And that's the reason why it's called Cobra effect. And try to be quite careful when you define how many KPIs you want to have, not to get so many KPIs that the people are starting to work for the metrics' sake. Since we are speaking about the development security, security is nothing without the development, right? And that's the reason why we need to have some supporting KPIs. You cannot measure the security just in a narrowed way. You need to see the full picture. How is your development going? And what is your application change time? Like, what are the deployment frequency? So how often do you go to the production? And what are the volume of the changes? And what is the change failure rate? At least these 4 metrics I usually suggest to keep as a supportive KPIs for the Devsecops KPIs, because those allows you to see the full picture for the security. If there are no frequent changes, of course, you will see the low rate of the security bugs, right? And the reason is just because you don't go to the production quite often. And of course, test coverage. So, security KPIs. I'm giving the examples. Those are not the blueprints. Again, I'm not giving the framework. Like I said, amount of the security KPIs and type of the security KPIs depends on how far you are with the Devsecops, what you are using. But these ones are the most common ones what I have seen across to be used, and it's quite good for the beginning. The first one is, if you saw on the supportive KPIs, there was as well test coverage. That means that you need to look as well, what is your code coverage from the security testing? how good you are when it comes to the security covering. Then another one is failed security tests. So how many security tests are failing while you're deploying or while you're, to be more correct, while you're building your code. Number of security findings identified in the code. So this is where we speak about the SAST tool, the static security application testing. Then another one is security findings burn rate or time to remediate. So how fast you're fixing the security findings, or we're gonna die in backlog, which happens often. I have seen that. Top vulnerability types, because this one, specifically this one KPI, will be really helpful for security team. Once they will identify what are the top vulnerability types and the top of reoccurring bugs, they can come and say, hey, I see that in every single sprint, no matter what, you're consistent in introducing SQL injection. What's wrong with you? No, I mean, they will come with some education, maybe with the tooling to help to avoid the same bugs. So where could be the root cause, why it's happening all the time? And then the number of failed builds due to the security checks. And believe me, you will have a huge number at the beginning, which is going to be quite scary. But remember, over the time, it should go down. And of course, not to get our developers by seeing all those numbers into the position like we're never gonna fix those things. The security just simply sucks because we can't do it. You need to measure something positive as well. And this is where you start to measure as well the successful security audit rate percentage. So to show that when auditors or the pen testers coming in, but we find less bugs. So these are the most common examples what I have seen, and this is the list what I would usually suggest to look into. I'm not suggesting to start with all of them. It's just like, inspirational, but at least I would look on, if you would ask what are the 3 of them, I would say top vulnerability types, top recurring bugs, and number of security findings identified in this in the code as well. These are pretty neutral and good to start. So how do we measure? The one thing is how to collect. And this is a place I'm open it for the sales. If someone has a cool product, I'm ready to put on the slide. No, I'm joking. Technically speaking, focus on what you have in the house. The problem is that on the market, you will not find a really good solution which will collect all the logs and will produce these KPIs. Most of the security products, they are vendor biased. They have their own KPIs, or they have like just they're focusing on what they do have. So once you start to focus what you have in the house, the first thing what you do is you look where you have the security. And these are the common spots what you have. It's like, I bet you, if you're telling me that you're doing Devsecops, I would say, that means you have dependency scanning, right? You do maybe have the static code analysis. You do have these tools. So it's all about the CI/CD at the beginning. And these are the sources what you can like to look into and start to collect. As an example, like you do have your build and release pipelines. It can be GitHub, Azure DevOps, Octopus deployed, Jenkins, you name it. All of them are producing the logs. So, and as well, you have the same security tools. And usually the good security tool is producing good logs or giving you the programmatic way, like KPIs to collect all that information, which would allow you to automate the things. And then as well, other tools. So once you have all of them, I think, yeah, Selenium works off the once you have identified all of those tools and you look on the KPIs, what you have defined, you see if you can collect all those numbers. And then the simple example, what we did was just using, for example, we had the Azure DevOps, and then we had the White Source Bolt and other, like, OWASP Zap integrated as a security checks. What we did, we started to collect all those logs and push to the Power BI. Management loves Power BI. They love diagrams. Product owners, they are like astonished. Like you can see it immediately if you're using the Azure DevOps. You know the place where the product owner spends the most time on the boards, right? So you can just push all that data to the Power BI and say like, yes, last month we fixed like 40 vulnerabilities, and now, but the previous month we were up on the, 20. So you can clearly see we are increasing, but the problem is that we are approaching our limit. We need to have more people. And the stakeholders like looks on the diagrams and says, yeah, I guess you need more money, right? No, but seriously, that gives you the visibility and the visual visibility. Like I mentioned, unfortunately, I haven't seen quite good vendor-neutral commercial product which can do like that collection. But security sometimes requires some effort. And if you spend some time just pulling out those logs and pushing into all those graphical representation, it can be the same Azure boards, or if you have the Power BI, whatever you have in the house, could help you to speak on the management language. Just use it. So, final thought. Metrics are not perfect. We still have a human, we still have a people, but the metrics gives you argument. It's easier to come to the management, it's easier to prioritize security if you have the numbers. And when we speak about the defining KPIs, remember there is no blueprint. You can take what I gave you for the inspiration, but you may find out that they don't work for you. They don't help you like to get the better visibility. And that's the reason why I said, like, first of all, try to find out what is your DevSecops and what are your challenges, and try to measure those challenges. SMART is a suggestion, but it's not like the blueprint. I would say, like, look at the SMART, get the inspiration, and try to follow that. And obviously, like I mentioned, the business as well is using the SMART. You can start by choosing the 5 or 6 common metrics. And what is most important, I haven't talked about that. It's about the responsibility. So you need to find the process in the team who is not only defining KPIs, but who is, for example, doing this integration work, like building that solution, and who is maintaining those KPIs, which is quite important. What can be helpful if you are pretty mature in DevOps? I bet you have the teams who are measuring, who are doing the DevOps KPIs, and you can just integrate the security there. So you can come and to the same guys and say, like, hey, I know that you're collecting the metrics. Don't you mind to add 2 or 3 metrics on the top in your system? If not, then again, depends on your situation. If you have the security champions in team, they can take that. If there is a dev lead, maybe he could be the first point, or if you have a quite good relationship with the product owner, you can say, like, hey, you know what, we can build all that integration, but can you like own those KPIs and help us to drive the conversation with the stakeholders? So next time we will not have these conversations why we need to have 40% time for the security in our sprint. And like I mentioned, build reporting on the top of used technologies. That's not me being cheap, that as well, but sometimes we don't use what we already have. We tend to buy the tools and think that those tools are gonna solve all our issues, and especially in the security world. There's no magic button, right? Like I mentioned, call for the action. Even we talk about the measurements already, first and foremost, if you already have defined what is a DevSecops for your organization, revisit it. Look if it's like, it is what it is. Then identify your challenges and define a list of the KPIs and try to evaluate them as a SMART. Take limit 5 or 6, not more, because each of the KPI takes some maintenance. And the small list allows you to be more agile and, like, you know, find if that works for you. Leverage what you have. And remember that without the appropriate measurement, DevSecops becomes just another hype. And on this positive note, I would love to pause and open the stage for the questions. Or you still have like 15 minutes for lunch, if there's something left. Thank you for your time.